This morning, strong words from top Wall Street CEOs in a letter to President Obama and the U.S. Congress urging Washington to work together in a bipartisan fashion and avoid the fast-approaching fiscal cliff. With us this morning to talk about this latest move by the Financial Services Forum is the chairman of the National Governors Association. He is the governor of Delaware. We welcome to Market Makers Governor Jack Markell. Governor, thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
So we talked about this a bit earlier with our last guest, who is an investor. What does it say to you? What does it mean to you that Wall Street CEOs should feel compelled to write a letter in this fashion, in this open fashion, to Congress and the president, urging action on the fiscal cliff?
Everybody's concerned, and they want clarity. And I thought what was interesting about the letter, first of all, they certainly want to avoid the fiscal cliff. Secondly, they were not very prescriptive. I think they basically said, why don't you get together on a bipartisan basis and figure it out? And finally, they said, in addition to avoiding the fiscal cliff, that's necessary but insufficient. We've really got to lay the groundwork for solid growth going forward. So I think it's not just about avoiding the fiscal cliff. It's really saying, what's it going to take for the economy to grow?
Should Wall Street be more prescriptive? Does Washington need them to lay it out because they haven't gotten the job done themselves?
I don't think so. I mean, I think there's, there was a lot of negotiations last year. There aren't that many ways to do this, and my hope is that they take a balanced approach. You're not going to be able to tax your way out of this. You're not going to be able to cut your way out of this. The only way to get out of this is to grow out. And so I think taking a balanced approach in the end is going to be what it takes.
Delaware isn't too far from Washington, Governor. Do you get the sense, whether it's in this Congress, in the lame duck session, or the next Congress, however it's comprised, that this plea for bipartisanship is going to register with anybody?
I sure hope so, and I hope it's not just wishful thinking.
I was going to say hope. I mean, we all, frankly, hope so, but hope hasn't gotten us very far.
That's true, but I think, let's face it, we'll be past the election, and I think part of the challenge and part of the frustration over the last few years is there's been such gridlock, and part of it started when, Mitch McConnell said that their goal in the Senate, the Republicans in the Senate, was to make the president a one-term president. Get past the election, and should the president win re-election, they'll obviously be past that. And I think there's so much demand across the country for clarity, for getting past this fiscal cliff, and really for laying a solid foundation for growth.
Then when you look at this gridlock in Washington, does it have you in a state of despair? We talk to CEOs every day that say, if Washington were a private company or a public company, it would be completely bankrupt. It would never work. Now, you don't just have a political background, you have a business background. So giving that background, what do you say now that you are in the throes of this gridlock?
Well, it's certainly very frustrating. It's one reason I'd much rather be a governor than be in Washington and in Congress, because when you're a governor and in a state, you can actually get things done. We, of course, also have to balance our budget, so it forces some of the tough decisions that we have to make in the states that they don't have to make in Washington. That being said, I think there's so much clamor from across the political spectrum, from the business community and everybody else, that I really do hope it gets done. And the president's been clear; he wants to get something done as well.
Everybody wants to get something done, but they have to come to an agreement. Look, you know what it's like, Republicans versus Democrats. Have you ever seen a time like this when there was this much rancor between these two parties?
I can't say that I have, and at the same time, I mean, I think the real question at the end of the day is whether they're going to take a balanced approach. I can tell you, when I came into office in Delaware in 2009, we faced an $800 million budget shortfall in the context of a $3 billion budget. I mean, it was massive. And the only way out was for us to take a balanced approach, and that's exactly what we did.
You were talking about when you became governor of Delaware, there was an $800 million deficit. You've closed it. Can you speak at all about the benefits of Delaware being such a business-friendly state?
Well, we are a very business-friendly state, and these days when you're focused on putting people back to work, that's the only thing that matters. And so I really take my lead from the 750 businesses that I've visited since I became governor. And when I visit businesses in Delaware or out, I ask one question, which is, what can we do to facilitate your success? Because, again, that's pretty much the only thing that matters these days. And their answers are pretty consistent. It's really about schools and workforce. I mean, that's by far the most important thing. They want to get, the businesses want to be able to have access to a great workforce, quality of life issues, reasonable taxes, reasonable cost of doing business, responsiveness in government, and having the right infrastructure in place.
Then should more states aim to be more business-friendly as they look at the massive deficits they face?
I think most governors across the country these days recognize that the #1 thing we each ought to be focused on is putting people back to work. And while it is true that a rising tide would lift all boats. We can't afford to just sit back and wait for the national economy to pick up, because there are things that we can do in our own states.
At the same time, though, I'm sure you've heard this, I'm certain that you've heard this criticism that if every state did business Delaware's way, it would be, you know, if you will, a race to the bottom in terms of making it too easy for companies to do business. Delaware, South Dakota, and others have enacted especially business-friendly legislation. And if every state tried to compete on that basis, you'd kind of be handing out, you'd be, you know, giving corporate America the farm.
First of all, I absolutely reject.
Of course you do. That's okay. That's why I brought it up.
We do have certainly the best corporate governance structure in the country, and that's why so many companies want to incorporate in Delaware. But it really goes beyond that. It really goes to the points of when companies are deciding where to invest their next dollar of capital, where to hire their next employee. They're going to want to be in states where they have access to a great workforce, you know, reasonable cost of doing business, a really responsive government, and that's how you race to the top.
Well, then let's talk about your support of President Obama, and you have it being so pro-business and having a business background, and the fact that there is somewhat of an anti-big business sentiment out of the White House. Where do you stand on it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's unfortunate that that's the way it's been reported. I mean, if you look at it, and some of the things just in the last few months that the president has done. He signed the Jobs Act. This was to make it easier for companies to go public, recognizing that after Sarbanes-Oxley, it got very expensive, very burdensome, particularly for smaller companies to go public. The president recognized that a lot of jobs get created after companies do their IPO. He signed the Jobs Act to make it easier for them to do so. You just were reporting about Latin America and the BRIC countries. One of the things that we want is we want our companies in this country to participate in economic growth around the world. He's been very focused on export promotion. And he's also been focused on attracting foreign direct investment into this country. You know, 25 years ago, all the foreign direct investment went from the United States elsewhere. We're in a different world now. And so he's been very focused on making sure that as companies around the world are deciding where to locate, where to invest, they're focusing on the United States.
And you don't believe Governor Mitt Romney, with his business expertise and background, is equipped to do the job?
I think it's really not just about the business background. I think it's about the lessons you learn when you're in business. And my view is that the most important thing we can do for this economy going forward is have an economy for a strong middle class. And I believe the president's got a much better approach there.
One of the things that the governor has argued for, I should say emphatically, is the need to cut tax rates. We can forget about individuals for a moment, but for corporations. And there is some sign, for sure, out of the White House that the president and the administration feel as though perhaps tax rates ought to be more competitive. Whose side are you on there? I mean, would you be more inclined to sign with the governor that we need to be perhaps more aggressive on bringing down corporate tax rates to make them competitive with, say, countries like Canada?
Well, as you say, the president actually...
He's Canadian, so just get ready. He's
a wonderful country. As you mentioned, the president himself last year proposed lowering corporate tax rates. So I think he's saying the right thing. I think that's the right approach. But the real question, and I think this is the big question for Governor Romney, he wants to lower a bunch of taxes. We'd all love to lower taxes. But the question is, how do you pay for it? And I think that's what he has not really, he's just not made that clear. And I think that's critically important. Because the question is, how do you continue to invest in things that are going to create long-term prosperity? That's about schools, that's about workforce, that's about infrastructure. And we can't lose sight of that, because when you look at what's going on around the world, other countries are investing massively in human capital, in schools, in workforce, and we can't afford to be left behind.
If jobs are jobs and we should value all of them, why do we hear the sentiment that it's okay, let's say, to bail out the auto industry, but it's not okay to bail out banks?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think the most depressing meetings I've ever had were in February of 2009. We got together as a National Governors Association in Washington, and we met separately with Ben Bernanke, with Timothy Geithner, and with Peter Orszag, who at the time was the head of the budget office. And what they said was essentially this. They said, we think we can get the economy going again, but we're not sure about the financial industry. It was frozen. There was an abyss. And I think the president deserves a lot of credit for walking us back from that. And I can tell you the financial services industry is critically important in our state. J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Capital One, Citigroup, Discover, Barclays, all have major presences in our state, along with others. And so I think, you know, frankly, they're in much better shape today than they were a few years ago, and certainly the automobile industry is as well.
Governor Markell, thank you for joining us. Awesome conversation this morning.